This video will discuss the mechanism, effects, risks, and harm reduction practices for using the psychoactive compound MDMA, short for 3,4-methylene dioxymethamphetamine. MDMA is also known by the names Ecstasy, Molly, Atom, and XTC. I'll sometimes refer to Ecstasy and MDMA interchangeably, but just know that MDMA refers to the pure substance, while Ecstasy or other names typically are used to refer to recreational doses that are not necessarily made of pure MDMA. In any case, MDMA or ecstasy, also referred to as penicillin for the soul, is a substance known for its stimulating, empathy-inducing, and synesthetic effects. Like any drug, taking MDMA comes with minor to life-threatening risks depending on how it's taken, so the focus here is going to be on understanding what MDMA is, how it works, the risk that its use carries, and how the harm of taking it can be reduced. Let's begin by observing Ari the alien, who's found himself at a music festival with some longtime friends. The group is looking forward to seeing their favorite metal band later that night, and they're enamored by the art, music, and joyful people all around them. Ari and their friends set up their campsite together, cook up a hearty meal, and begin discussing their plans to use ecstasy that one of them picked up and tested with a reagent kit before the festival. The group openly discusses the timing and dosage, with one person offering to measure out 100-milligram doses for the rest, and placing them into capsules to take by mouth. They check in with each other about how they feel and what they hope to get out of the trip, enhancing the lights set up around the festival, exploring closeness and emotional depth, being open to a first experience. For some of the friends, this is an experience they plan each year for this particular festival. About an hour after dosing and on the walk to the concert, Ari notices that the sound of distant music begins to resonate with their body. The lights along their path seem more colorful somehow, and they feel pulled to stand there and keep watching. Ari's friend takes their hand so that they keep going, and the contact of their friend's hand turns into this buzzing purple warmth that travels up their arm and settles into contentment that pools in their chest. Ari's mind and heart blossom out of an overwhelming sense of care and love for their friend, which they manage to outwardly express with a simple, "I love you so much." During the concert, Ari feels euphoric and grateful to be experiencing their favorite band with their favorite people, remembering every now and again to sip their electrolyte drink, and reminding their friends to do the same. Though the group finds themselves moving to the music, it's a relatively cool night, and they're dancing in an area slightly less crowded than in front of the stage. Whether you've knowingly practiced harm reduction or not, it's something worth mentioning when discussing the consumption of any recreational substance. Harm reduction in this context refers to practices that aim towards reducing physical, psychological, and social harm, but in general, harm reduction would be something like wearing a seatbelt when you're driving. Much of the risk associated with MDMA and ecstasy is in fact less about the drug itself, but rather the uncertainty about exactly what is in the capsule or tablet being taken. In the United States, MDMA is classified as a Schedule I narcotic, and these are defined as having no accepted medical uses and having a high potential for abuse or addiction. This class of drug is illegal to possess, manufacture, or sell, which leaves the production and sale of MDMA to unregulated channels. So, without regulation, there's a greater risk of contamination, cutting with unexpected and potentially more dangerous substances like fentanyl or methamphetamine, and questionable potency that can make overdose more likely. With these kinds of risks, you'd be reasonable to avoid taking recreational ecstasy or MDMA altogether, but people take it anyway, so let's take a look at what Ari and their friends did to minimize the risks of taking MDMA before discussing how exactly it works at the level of a neuron. The organization RollSafe has compiled a checklist to follow so as to increase the likelihood of a safe and enjoyable experience when you're using ecstasy or MDMA. That list includes being aware of pre-existing health conditions and medications that interfere, ruling out unexpected compounds in the sample to be taken using a reagent test kit, waiting as long as possible, but at least 5 weeks between trips, abiding by dosage guidelines which max out around 120 milligrams, drinking enough water, but not too much, when you're rolling, knowing the signs of and taking precautions to avoid heat stroke, with symptoms being like heavy sweating, weakness, cold and clammy skin, nausea or vomiting, fainting, as well as setting and communicating the intention of the experience to the people that you're with. Other tips from RollSafe include getting a good night's sleep, eating a healthy meal before using, planning time for recovery the following day, and having someone around during the experience to help look out for you. So let's talk about what's going on when Ari and their friends take MDMA. They each took about 0.1 milligrams or 100 milligrams of ecstasy by mouth, and while other methods of ingestion are technically possible, like injection or insufflation or snorting, oral administration is common among recreational users, and when MDMA is consumed orally, the drug passes through the stomach, small intestines, before it enters the liver. In the liver, MDMA is processed and broken down to some degree. The liver modifies some of the MDMA into other products that get excreted, leaving a smaller fraction of the drug to pass into Ari's bloodstream, where it can travel to the brain. Once in the brain, MDMA is going to act on nerve cells that make and release neurotransmitters, including serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. These nerve cells are also known as monoaminergic neurons, since serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine are all monoamine neurotransmitters. What MDMA does is cause these neurons to release a flood of primarily serotonin into the synapse, or the space between neurons, but also some norepinephrine and dopamine. It's going to do this in a similar way to stimulants like amphetamine and methamphetamine, which look similar in structure, but unlike amphetamine, MDMA will be primarily releasing serotonin instead of dopamine. MDMA is understood to facilitate this release of serotonin by the following mechanisms. So first, MDMA competes with serotonin at these transporters at the end or terminal of a neuron, and those transporters are responsible for taking up serotonin from the synapse. So MDMA kind of prevents serotonin from being taken back up, therefore increasing the concentration in the synapse. Secondly, MDMA acts as an inhibitor of this other transporter inside of the neuron called VMAT2, which takes up monoamine neurotransmitters like serotonin into a vesicle inside of the neuron. So MDMA inhibits this transporter from taking up serotonin in the neuron, which makes the concentration of serotonin in the neuron higher. So finally, MDMA also acts as an agonist or an activator of a third receptor, which is abbreviated TAAR1. And when this receptor is activated by MDMA, it triggers the release of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine by their respective transporters into the synapse. So this raises the extracellular concentration of serotonin and these other neurotransmitters in the synapse. This flood of serotonin is understood to facilitate the positive psychological effects that our friend Ari is feeling after taking MDMA. The euphoria, sense of well-being, energy, sociability, and the altered perception of colors and sounds. But there's a little more to the story, because serotonin is just a first step in what is a complex biochemical cascade that gives all of those effects. Serotonin is what's known as a first messenger, which stimulates or inhibits the activity of a protein or enzyme in the next or postsynaptic neuron. This action can then increase or decrease the synthesis or breakdown of a second messenger, which is called that because it happens after serotonin, the first messenger. From there, the altered levels of a second messenger will go on to induce biochemical or physical changes in that postsynaptic neuron. So in the case of MDMA, we might see calcium, diacylglycerol, or CAMP as our second messengers. And so an explanation of, say, the feelings of empathy and closeness that MDMA can induce is that serotonin goes on to induce the release of oxytocin, which is a hormone that we associate with those feelings. So the flood of serotonin seems to be responsible for the experience that Ari is going to have for about 2 or 3 hours. But what happens after? Where does all that serotonin go? So firstly, MDMA is depleting serotonin by inducing its release from the neuron into the synapse. It's also inhibiting the reuptake of serotonin, which prevents the neuron from being able to recycle that serotonin. And lastly, MDMA is going to be inhibiting an enzyme that's involved in the synthesis of serotonin, where that synthesis begins with the amino acid tryptophan, which gets modified to 5-hydroxytryptophan, which is further modified to become 5-hydroxytryptamine, or serotonin. So what MDMA does is inhibit the enzyme tryptophan hydroxylase, which prevents the production of 5-HTP, or that intermediate between tryptophan and serotonin. So those 3 factors contribute to this massive reduction of serotonin levels in the brains of MDMA users and are associated with the unpleasant come-downs from taking the drug, as well as a serious condition that's called serotonin syndrome, which can affect users for weeks or months following the use of MDMA. So we discussed some of the positive effects that Ari felt from taking MDMA, but what about the risks that we mentioned initially? Despite precautions taken as a method of reducing harm, taking MDMA carries biological risk in the form of more minor symptoms such as increased heart rate, teeth grinding, anxiety, difficult or low moods during the come-down of the substance, but also more major issues like serotonin syndrome, which is characterized by high blood pressure, dangerously elevated body temperature, delirium, and seizures at its most severe, as well as organ failure, liver and kidney failure, specifically from muscle deterioration, which can obviously result in death. So those more serious risks are typically associated with taking high and or frequent doses of MDMA, so beyond the effective dose, which ranges between like 20 and 100 milligrams. Some of the risks of MDMA are exacerbated by the environment it's taken in, as well as the behavior of an individual. So if an individual is physically active, like when they're dancing, they're going to be at a higher risk for dangerously elevated body temperature and dehydration, in which case they should apply a cold pack, move to a cooler, shadier location, make sure to drink water or an electrolyte solution, and take advantage of evaporative cooling. Another risk that MDMA can pose is addictive behavior. So The chemical addiction potential of MDMA is fairly low because it lasts for several hours, and the tolerance to the drug builds really quickly in the body. So users of MDMA might continue to use that substance despite the problems that arise from it, such as participating in risky behavior, reducing time doing other activities, withdrawal symptoms, and or increasing the dose they're taking due to the development of the tolerance, up to those dangerous doses that are more likely to cause serotonin syndrome and cognitive issues. Speaking of cognitive issues, there is evidence from animal studies that suggest that MDMA could cause some deterioration of the fibers that make up the serotonin system in parts of the brain. So that deterioration is associated with reduced cognitive function that presents across light, moderate, and heavy users of ecstasy, but it's usually more pronounced in heavier users. So even in light users, there's evidence of reduced activity or density of the serotonergic system, as well as cognitive performance, but those deficits have been seen to improve if you don't take MDMA, so abstaining from it, which suggests that following the MDMA-specific harm reduction practice of keeping at least 5 weeks, and ideally more, between uses could allow for recovery from the cognitive effects of MDMA. So the conclusion here being that while ecstasy can feel good, it can't solve your problems on its own and can in fact cause serious harm to your brain if it's used irresponsibly. People in your life who you trust might just be able to help you though through whatever you're going through. And with that said, MDMA appears to be a promising treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder when taken alongside guided psychotherapy. It's thought to help manage fear during recollection of trauma and help with memory reconsolidation. And in this setting, users avoid much of the risks associated with taking MDMA because in a clinical setting, they're able to take pure MDMA that has been measured precisely, and they've got the support of a nurse and a therapist to help them through anything that might come up. So to wrap up this video, MDMA is a powerful substance used by humans, and in this video, aliens, to induce feelings of love, empathy, and closeness, as well as altered perceptions of sound and color through its activity in serotonergic pathways in the brain. With the right precautions and in therapeutic settings, the risks to using MDMA are fairly minor, but its illegal status and lack of regulation pose danger because of the unknown identity and dose of recreational samples. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.